What's your relationship like with money? How do you define money?
I remember calling him because I got my first freelance job and I was like, how does anyone do this? Like, what are you supposed to charge? How much do you charge? No one teaches it. No one talks about it. Money is a very personal thing. I have trouble with the idea of charge what you're worth. You believe that people are shortchanging you and you believe that you're supposed to get paid what you are worth. Then it becomes a personal affront when somebody undervalues you.
Right.
I wonder how I could think about work differently if it's worth different things in different scenarios.
Where do you get this way of thinking? It's amazing. You went from 90,000 to 231. So that's more than 2.5 times. That's insane. How did you get to this point?
So if somebody was like, we need like a video done, how long it would take you to do this? I don't know about video production. Yeah, I'll do a video. How much would you charge for a video? $5,000. Man, my kids know how to do value-based pricing.
Well, you're like overcharging me. I feel like you're taking advantage of me. How do you respond to that?
I'll give you 3 different answers for it. I disagree that value pricing is harder. I think it's easier. I think it's more natural. I think what makes it harder is that we...
Hey everyone, welcome to the Digital Third Podcast. In this episode, we have Dan Mall back, and this time we talk about how to make more money. This is an awesome episode. It is full of juicy tips and advice, strategies on how to price your work. So if you are a creative who's struggling how to price your work and want to get better in negotiating or sales calls, you're going to love this episode. We get into the nuance of pricing strategies, how to position yourself as a brand to command a larger price. Dan shares his insights on moving away from the traditional time-based rates and instead pricing projects based on the value they deliver to clients, which is value-based pricing. You're gonna love it. There's a lot to dig into, so put your seatbelts on and get ready. This is gonna be a great one. Without further ado, enjoy the episode. Dan, super excited to have you on. For those who don't know you, let's just start with you introducing who you are and tell a little bit about what you do.
Cool. My name is Dan Mall. I live just outside of Philly. I'm a husband and a dad and a designer and a creative director and a writer and an entrepreneur. And I do a bunch of things, apparently. And I've been doing that for a long time. Mostly I sit at my desk and draw different size rectangles. And yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. And yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. It's a privilege to get to know you over the years. I know we first met by bringing you on into the Reloom Design League. And prior to that, I heard about you from Christo's podcast. This was like, maybe 2 years ago, maybe longer? It was a while ago. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is great. And then the more I found out about, like, you are the man. Like, you've been around the industry for a while. You're well known. So I just want to acknowledge you for being very generous. And I think obviously we bonded recently over the fishing trip with Christo, which is
over salmon.
Yeah, over salmon. So that was really great. And I think it's just been great. And I obviously you're multi-talented. You specialize, and everyone knows you now in design systems. But I think it would be really interesting for this episode if we take a little trip down memory lane. And obviously, you specialize a little bit in pricing design. You released a book, I think, over 8 years now. Pricing design.
Yeah, 2016.
2016. Yeah. So I think it'd be great to touch on, a little bit of value-based pricing, and I think it'd be appropriate to open up this conversation by referring to a few tweets that you made.
Oh no, I haven't. Where is this going, Josh?
Well,
I'm so scared about what you're going to pull up.
Well, let's see here. Let me share my screen here, and it says here, this is back in July 24th. I think it started with you looking for a senior designer to what you call now a designer who can ship, right? And so I think, you said here, of all my DMs and replies right now, either saying something to the effect of, how dare you take advantage of people, or this opportunity would be perfect for me. And I was wondering, maybe you can share a bit of context around this and, what sparked some controversy around, basically it's money and designers. And so I think if we can unpack this whole concept of, designers valuing their worth, talking about money, I think it'd be really interesting to explore.
Yeah, sure. So, okay,
Yeah.
I'll set some context. I wrote a post a while ago. I'm thinking about hiring my first designer for my business. I used to run an agency. I hired many designers with my agency. So after shutting that down, I now run different businesses, and I'm basically working on those businesses on my own with a little bit of help here and there. So I'm looking at hiring my first designer for those businesses, and I wrote a post about it, just talking about what I wanted to hire for. I called it a designer who can ship. And I'm looking for something specific. And I also was pretty transparent about like, here's how much I can afford to pay. And essentially, what I said was, I can afford to pay $3,000 a month, and we can get into how I came across that number, or we can do that too.
Hmm.
And I wrote this post, and that's what led to this tweet. As I got a lot of people who commented on that part in particular, in privately in DMs to me, publicly, replying to the tweet and replying to other stuff that I'd posted online. And it resulted in very polarizing reactions, in that people being like, "How dare you? Like $3,000, that's nothing. Three thousand
Right.
dollars a month is nothing." And then other people being like, "I would kill for this opportunity." And I'm like, what a wild spread it
Right.
was. Oh, almost nothing in the middle. Very little in the middle compared to those two ends of the spectrum. And so yeah, another example just goes to show like how relative a lot of this stuff is.
Right. Yeah. I think it's interesting because people can view compensation purely on money. But yeah, for some, they're viewing it for just access to you and resources and even network and maybe a little bit of exposure too. So I'd love to, yeah, break that down. Also, I have another tweet here that I like
Oh
to
boy.
share. Don't worry, it's all good. But yeah, I think you made a poll in September that maybe yeah you can create another course or a book or follow-up book from yours, how to get rich as a designer. And so obviously 100 people, over 100 people voted, 56 said yes. So I think that there's a hunger for people to learn about money. So yeah, let's open that up a little bit. I mean, how do you personally, for you, what's your relationship like with money? How do you define money? Is it based on time? Is it based on value? Is it, attention, energy, whatever? Like, how do you view money?
Some of those are very easy questions. Some of those are very tough questions. I'm going to start with the easy ones. My history with money, so my dad is an accountant.
Right.
And so growing up, like we talked about money a lot, and money was like a big topic in our household. My parents were both immigrants. We didn't make a lot of money, as a family growing up. So that was part of the context. And I watched my dad go from, and my dad and my mom's a nurse, go from like very low income family to a very high income family, through the course of me being a little kid all the way up to high school. And then when I moved out for college. So money was a thing that we always talked about. My dad was always the church treasurer too, right? So I would help him with the church treasury and writing up all the ledgers and, all the tallying up the loose offering and all that stuff every week. So I would help him with some of that stuff. So money was like a big part of growing up. We talked about it openly. My brother is now a financial advisor, so like it,
Okay.
it is in my family,
Yeah.
like talking about money and being open about money, and then being a designer. I mean, that's not a field that has anything to do with finance, or at least on its
Right.
head.
Yeah.
But I started to learn, especially through design and entrepreneurship, that like, oh, money comes in different ways for people who have the skill set. It could come through a full-time job. It could come through freelancing and having side income and passive income. It could come from making your own products, making your own businesses. And so it's just always been a thing that I've been fascinated by and tuned into. And I learned that not a lot of people like talking about it.
Okay.
And when I was first freelancing, my wife reminds me of this all the time. My first creative director, I remember calling him when I was a junior designer. I remember calling him because I got my first freelance job, and I was like, "How does anyone do this? Like, what are you supposed to charge? How
Hmm.
much do you charge?" And like that was like a really formative thing in my design career, was just being like, how do you do this? No one teaches it, no one talks about it. There's not a lot you can read about it. And so as I learned more about it, I just felt like, this is a kind of a running theme through my career. I just felt like, well, as I'm learning stuff, I want to share it with other people too,
Hmm.
so that they can learn it too.
Right. What do you think is the biggest gap from, again, like your recent experience and seeing how designers view money? What do you think is like the biggest knowledge gap that they are missing when it comes to money and being successful in a business?
So two things. One is, I think that financial literacy is a thing that not just designers miss out
Right.
on, but a lot of people just have not a lot of financial literacy, myself included. I just read a book that's a very simple book on finance. I just finished it, a couple of days ago, and it was like there's a ton of stuff I didn't know in there.
Mhm.
So like as someone who has studied and read about this stuff before, which is I think more than most people do. Most people don't read about money or finance or anything like that. It just kind of happens to them and they roll with it. So I think financial literacy is definitely something that is missing generally in America. I live in America. Generally that's true. I think in the world also, I know less about that. So I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is that money is a very personal thing. It's
Mhm.
very relative to your context, to your circumstances, all of those things. So those two things combined are a recipe for like really being misaligned when people talk about money is because, my experience with money is different than other people's.
Right.
My context with it is different than other people's too. So like we have to make sure we're even on the same planet of talking about this stuff before we try to talk about it in a way that we each understand. So I think those two things combined make it really tough to talk about money is because we have to establish context. And
Right.
we also sometimes just have to establish like just the literacy that we're talking about the same thing.
Got it. Okay. All right. Yeah, and I think I definitely want to go into because I think there are topics out there where we're encouraged as designers to charge what we're worth, right? And obviously, I think this is a mindset thing. I think our self worth is directly correlated to how much we can charge, and I think it's a mindset and like how we value ourselves. So therefore, it kind of reflects in the pricing that we do, right? So I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit on your thoughts on that and what you think about that.
Yeah, sure. Josh, I know this is a bit of a leading question. You and I have talked about this before on boats
Yeah.
and other places too. Um, I have trouble with the idea of charge what you're worth. I wrote a blog post on this called "Don't Charge What You're Worth,"
Okay.
and the premise of that is it's not that I don't believe that designers shouldn't make good money. I think that we have a skill in the world that is highly valuable. Um, it's that I want to decouple the idea that what we get paid is what we as people are worth.
Okay.
Like, as people, what are we worth? Like millions, billions, trillions. Like we're worth everything.
Hmm.
Everything. Like that's part of my
Priceless.
worldview. Priceless, right? Like as people, come on. Like my first job, I think I remember my first salary job as a designer. I was paid like $56,000 a year, something like that.
Hmm.
Is that what I'm worth? $56,000 a year? Like, no.
Mm.
Hopefully, I'm worth more than that. Like, worth like two Toyota Corollas. Like, I don't, like, no. I'm worth more than that as a person. But is that what my skills are worth at the time? That actually is closer, I think, to the truth. So
Okay.
I think we have to decouple the idea that what we are getting paid is for our skills. And I think more as I learn more and more in my career, it's actually what I'm able to do for someone as a service. It's what that service is worth or what that output is worth or what that outcome is worth. I think that's closer to the conversation that's more realistic than what
Mm.
I am worth as a person. And I think that a lot of people are offended, rightly so, if you believe that people are shortchanging you and you believe that you're supposed to get paid what you are worth, then it becomes a personal affront when somebody undervalues you.
Right. Okay.
And it's like, well, wait, that's not what they're doing. They are actually undervaluing maybe your work, but those two things are different.
Mm.
Or at least I think they're different. And I know not everybody agrees with that, but part of my worldview is we have to decouple what we are worth as people against what the thing that we do is worth, or what the thing that we are making is worth, or what the outcome of that thing is worth.
Mm.
I think those become easier conversations to have. But if you don't have that worldview, that's what makes it tough too.
I love that. I think that is a game changing mindset and perspective around that because when you can, like you said, decouple and detach, then you can actually deal with the business side a lot more in the negotiations because it's not reflective of like who you are. And so you don't get offended when, people lowball you and things like that, which is great. Kind of gives you an edge to play around with money. And again, so that comes back to how do you view money? Do you view it as just like, yeah, like just simply numbers, or is it more to you, more than that for you? Yeah, because of course people can also view money as just a way of like investments, and so they'll throw money at certain problems and things like that. So yeah, maybe share with me a little bit of like how you view that, or the evolution of how you view money as you've probably grown in more income and things like
Yeah,
that.
totally. So I think in general, money is an abstraction, right? We get pieces of paper that have numbers on them and they're supposed to represent things.
Hmm.
You know, $1 represents something different than $10, different than $100, $1,000, $1,000,000. We get pieces of paper and like pieces of metal, you know, circular pieces of metal that represent that. But those on their own don't mean anything. It's the what we ascribe to them. So, and this is what I mean by like money is relative.
Mm.
So when I look at a dollar, I don't know what the piece of paper that says one is worth with the president's, you know, in the US president's head on it. But I do know that if I go to a store, I could trade that in for a candy bar, or I could trade that in for a pack of stickers, or I could trade that in for a, you know, whatever it is. And I also cannot trade that in for like a car. I can't trade that $1 in for a car because no one would give me a car for that $1. I can't trade that $1 in for a house because no one would give me a house for that $1. I would have to trade more of those $1 in for those things. So like it's an abstraction that represents something. And one of the things that helped me learn that when I was a young designer, new designer, and I wrote a post about this one too called object value pricing. Whenever I freelanced, I would freelance for things that I wanted to buy. So like I had a good full-time job at the time. I didn't need to freelance. So I freelanced because like I wanted to learn a new thing, or mostly it was because I wanted to buy a new thing.
Okay.
I'm a spender. I don't know if I told you that, but like
No.
any amount of money I have, I spend. Is $1 or $1,000,000, I'll spend it. So I like buying things. If I wanted to buy a new camera, like, okay, I would go freelance for that. And I would try to find a job that was worth that amount of money. A new camera was what, $500? So I try to go find a $500 freelance job. I want to take a vacation. That was $1,000. I try to go find $1,000 freelance job. I want to get a new TV. I wanted to like, get a car. I want to put a down payment on a house. Like that's how I thought about money. Was it's hard to understand the abstract value of a piece of paper or a bunch of metal coins. But it's easy to go like, well, this amount of work gets me a camera. That amount of work gets me and I started to learn that like, oh, in some instances, this amount of work got me a camera and that same amount of work got me a vacation that was worth 2 cameras.
Mm-hmm.
So is it and again, I started to decouple the idea that like, well, the same amount of work in one scenario is worth this and in another scenario is worth something else.
Right.
So is it about the work being valuable? It can't be about that, because then that work would be valued at the same thing every time, right? So, but I wonder how I could think about work differently if it's worth different things in different scenarios.
I love it. Where do you get this way of thinking? It's amazing. It's very smart, and I think it's clever. Yeah, it kind of safeguards you from I guess potential negative outcomes.
Well, I want to say like it's not like a mindset or anything. I mean, it is now because I've learned these lessons, but at the time it was a puzzle. Like at the time for me, it was like, well, why did that client pay me 500 and this other client paid me 1,000? I did the same thing.
Right.
Like it was a conundrum that I had. It wasn't like, ooh, I have a fancy new perspective on life. Or maybe years later after in hindsight I did. But at the time it was like, it was a real head scratcher. It was like, why is this the case?
Right.
Because what I had learned was different. What I had learned was design is worth $25 an hour or $100 an hour, whatever it was. And it's like, well, but it wasn't though. That wasn't true over there. And it was true over here. So like, who is lying in this scenario? Or is there something else that I need to learn to explain this?
Right.
So, for me, it was a lot of like conundrums and coming to like to conclusions from that I didn't know if were right or wrong, but like they work. So, a lot of this comes from just straight up experience and being in the weeds and trying to figure it out.
Got it. Okay. I have another slide to share with you.
A slide.
It's your public blog, and you posted your salary. Are you okay if we kind of share the evolution of that? Because I think this is extremely impressive.
Put it out there.
This is you in 2012. I think this is when you first started Super Friendly. Is that right? And so there's a breakdown of your annual salary and then Super Friendly's annual revenue.
Yep.
And I think previous to this, 2011, where is that? I got to look at my notes here.
Yeah, if you scroll up, it's back there.
Yeah, 2011, you had $90,000. There it is, as a design director. And then you decided to go on your own, basically freelancing or start your own business. And you went from 90,000 to 231. So that's more than 2.5 times. That's insane. So how did you get to this point? Was that you shifting your pricing, the value-based pricing right away, or was it like project-based? Maybe you can, before you dive into that, break down the different pricing models, whether it's like you're trading, money for time and then transition to value-based.
Yeah, totally. So there's, as you're mentioning, there's a lot of different pricing models, which is just a fancy way of saying like different ways that people make money and or run a business.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One way to do that, that's a fairly traditional way for services, is to set a particular time unit for a particular price, which is could be like an out. I charge $100 an hour. That's like a time-based unit and a rate per time. Or you could charge per week or per day or per month, right? So that's like any time-based rate.
Mm-hmm.
Then a flavor of that is a fixed fee, right? Where you're not charging for a unit of time, but you're charging for a unit of maybe deliverables or units of deliverables. You say, I'm going to do these 5 deliverables for this fixed fee. Doesn't matter how much time it takes me. And then there's value-based pricing, which is not really a contrast to those two things. Value-based pricing basically just means you're not charging on time, you're not charging on deliverables, you're charging on the outcome or the prospective outcome that you are promising to a client.
Okay.
Or to a customer. You can have, and this gets a little bit tricky, so maybe we won't go too far down here, but
Mm-hmm.
you can have a value-based, time-based rate.
Okay.
You can have a value-based weekly rate. You can have a industry-based weekly rate. So there's lots of mix and matches of all those things. Anyway, all to say, lots of different ways that you can charge for time or charge for deliverables or charge for lots of different ways that you can kind of slice that up. I've tried a bunch of them. I tried a lot of them.
Okay.
And I found that the ones that I understand the best are the ones that I do the best with. And that's the advice that I give to anybody who's charging. There is
Okay.
no good or bad way to charge. The way that you understand best is probably the way that you'll make the most money. If
Right.
you don't understand value-based pricing, you won't make a lot of money with value-based pricing. If
Mm-hmm.
you don't understand hourly-based pricing, you won't make a lot of money with hourly-based pricing. I didn't really understand hourly-based pricing that well. So that's
Okay.
why I didn't do well at it. But it's not because it's inherently bad or good. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people out there who do say that one model is good, one model is bad. I don't have that opinion. I get why they say that stuff. That's not how I think about it. So lots of different models around that. None of those had any effect on how much I made in those years. All of it was just about like just head scratchers. Like, why did this work or why did this happen?
Mm.
And a lot of it was just due to luck. So, I mean, do you want me to tell you that story?
Yeah, sure. I mean, or maybe even you can share like how you jumped from 90,000 to 230 in your first year.
Yep.
That'd be great.
So,
Yeah.
so 90,000. I made $90,000. I lived in New York. It's 2011. I lived in Brooklyn. New York is a fairly expensive place to live. That was what my agency that I worked at. That's what they were paying. That was the rate. From what I understood, that's what all design directors there got paid. So that was the industry rate for that position, or
Right.
at least the company rate for that position, which could be a lie. I don't know, but I believe it's the truth. I think it's the truth. And then my wife and I, at that time, we had our first kid in Brooklyn, and we moved back to Philadelphia, where we had a lot of family around because we wanted the help of grandparents and brothers-in-laws and sister-in-law, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we moved back to Philly, and Philly has a lower standard of living than New York. It's less expensive to live. Because I was starting my own agency, my forecast was, well, if I was making 90 in New York, if I could make 60 in Philly, we would be good.
Okay.
And actually, the plan was if all things didn't work out with starting my own business, I was going to pitch my parents on us moving into their basement so that we could at least save some money in that. Luckily, we didn't have to do that, but it was like, okay, I'm going to try to make 60. If I can't even make 60, we'll have to figure something else out. So that was like that was the goal.
The freelancer's dilemma.
Yeah, totally. Right. So the goal was $60,000 a year.
Okay.
My stretch goal was double that, 120.
Okay.
And honestly, the reason that it was those numbers is the math was easy. $120,000 a year is $10,000 a month because it's 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
So 120 divided by 12, that's 10K a month.
Which is
so
amazing.
My stretch goal was like, if I could make 10K a month, that'd be awesome. It'd be double what it would actually need. And I think that our annual expenses were something like $40,000 or $50,000 a year, like car payments and rent and, all that kind of stuff. And so it's like, all right, if I can make 60, we're good. We have some surplus. If we can make 120, that's killing. Like we're awesome. Like we're in great shape. So that was the goal, was 10K a month. So what I would do is I would pitch clients or I would get inquiries, and anybody that would pay me $10,000 for a month to do anything, I'd be like, done, we'll do it.
Okay.
And really, anybody who would pay me $5,000 a month, because that would get me to my 60.
Okay.
Anybody who would pay $5,001, anything above 5,000, I would just say yes.
So you
So
had
you need some
targets.
video?
You had targets to
Oh yeah.
nail to go in those ranges. Okay. Okay.
Yep. So if somebody was like, we need like a video done, how long it would take you to do this? I don't know about video production. I don't know anything about that. Yeah, I'll do a video. How much would you charge for a video? $5,000, right? Because I thought it would take me about a month of
Okay.
time. That
Okay,
was it.
interesting. So that wasn't based off of value-based pricing. It was you had a target. So it if anything, that's more of like a project-based pricing model. Like, or you just
Okay.
had a price. You this is what I do. This is what I'm charging. And if they said yes, then that's it. Okay, pretty straightforward.
Well, maybe
Okay.
because value-based pricing, what I was doing value-based pricing, I just didn't know it. What I was
Okay.
valuing was like, this is my value right now. It's
Okay.
what my monthly expenses were. I didn't reveal that to the client, but that's how I was thinking about it.
Right.
That's what I valued. I valued my time, effort, for a month, what I valued that amount of effort for or time for. This is an example of a time-based value rate, right? A time-based value-based price.
Right.
It's $5,000 a month for me.
Okay.
So anything over that was like, yeah, cool, that's great. Like because it's taking care of what I valued, which was my monthly expenses.
Mhm.
Now, other forms of value pricing, the form of value pricing that I generally teach is like, well, you have to value more than that. You have to actually provide value to the client and also highlight the value that it would bring to them. But like I wasn't doing any of that stuff. I didn't know about that stuff.
Mm.
So it was like, I need to make $5,000 a month. So this is the price.
Okay. Very cool. I think this is a perfect segue to jump into this little diagram.
Okay.
And before we jump into that, I just realized that my Zoom call is limited to 40 minutes. So when we're up, I'll just send another link and then we can continue.
Okay.
Okay, so here we are. And I think so typically the price on the left here, this is just like a regular, let's say like project-based pricing where you have a certain profit and you increase it and you have obviously the amount of costs. So that's more or less fixed. So it just depends on how much profit you want, then the overall price for the value would be it, right?
Yep.
On the right, can you talk a little bit about like how value is created through this? And so like you obviously had, let's say, $5,000, you can increase that, and then you have your cost, and then your client's profit. Would you consider that into the overall price as well, or how would that go?
So, okay, so let's talk about it in the context of the example that I just gave.
Sure.
My cost was about $4,500 a month, like something around there.
Okay.
And I wanted a little bit of cushion on top of that, which cushion is a fancy word for profit, or profit's a fancy word for cushion. So I wanted like a little bit of profit on top of that, just to have some breathing room. And so that's the graph on the left. My cost was 4,500. I wanted
Okay.
like I put a $500 buffer on that, and that was $5,000. That's my price.
Okay.
And as I just mentioned, like I wasn't taking into account at all what value is created, what I'm doing for the client. All of that was me centric. That was all
Right.
Dan centric. My costs, my profit, like all of that stuff. And that kind of pricing is usually called cost plus pricing,
Okay.
which is what your costs, you add a little bit, that's the plus part,
Mhm.
and then that's how you come up with the price. And so that was my formula for doing it. I didn't at all take into account, well, what does the client get out of this? And if I was able to do that, then I could pitch on that, right? So the client that wants the video, even though I don't do video stuff, I'm like, all right, well, I was just doing the stuff on the left. If I were to actually pitch that properly with like proper value-based pricing, that's the way that I teach it now,
Mhm.
then I would have had to think about, well, so what do they get if they have a video? Why are they even asking for a video in the first place? Well, they wanted a video so that they could send that video to their prospects, and then that would maybe earn them an additional X amount of dollars per their transaction for whatever they did.
Right.
Right. And that's value created for them. So
Mhm.
now on top of my cost, on top of my price, on top of my cost, on top of my profit, there's now their profit,
Mhm.
right? Which maybe I'm making them, am I making them an extra 10 grand a month?
Right.
Well, if I'm making them an extra 10 grand, would they be willing to slice off an extra 1,000 for me because I'm able to do that for them?
Right. And so I think
Right.
that's a good rule of thumb is like, let's say you make 10,000, then you take 10% as like as a return. That's
Totally.
nice to calculate. Okay.
And that's generally where I start too with value based. The pricing that I do now is basically that's the formula is how much, what are they getting out of it?
Right.
And then I start my negotiation at I take 10% of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I take 10% of that upfront.
Right.
It's not a commission. It's not a commission on money received. It is an in advance investment in that. And that's where I start my negotiation.
Okay. Now we all know about value-based pricing, but I think it's so much harder to do in practice. I think we get the concept. I think this is where we have to improve our negotiation skills. Because even for me recently, and I think putting like pricing websites, and you have a lot of experience pricing websites in the past. I have a minimum $5,000 of brand or discovery first, right, strategy, and I need to do that upfront before we find out how complex the scope is, and then we can price more. So that's kind of like my minimum engagement amount. And then when I do, and then if we go ahead, I also have like a minimum amount of how much I'm gonna price for a basic website, which is another 5,000. So basically, minimum engagement value will be like 10K. So, but I those are my prices in my head, but it's hard. I guess maybe it takes practice. Because then we would get in a conversation in the discovery, and then the client would be like, okay, well, how much would this cost? And then I would naturally share that number instead of saying, hey, let's just find out how much value it's creating for you first. Now, I think there's a catch there, because let's say they only value a website that's for like $1,000, and if I take 10% of that, it's only $100. So that wouldn't work. So maybe can you share like some tips and tricks or advice on how to go about actually doing value-based pricing properly?
Yeah, totally. So one thing I'll just call out is I disagree that value pricing is harder. I think it's easier.
Okay.
I think it's more natural. I think what makes it harder is that we complicate it. Value-based pricing is a methodology. Oh, a methodology. This must be something that I have to do some wizardry to get to a methodology. I'm like, man, my kids know how to do value-based pricing, right? Like when we're kids in kindergarten, it's like, I'll trade you my bubble gum for your tuna fish sandwich, right? Like if you're the one with the tuna fish sandwich, you're like, I'm not giving up my tuna fish sandwich. My bubble gum's worth more.
Mm.
And so you don't do the trade. That's value-based pricing.
Okay.
Like, is it worth more? Like, who is it worth more to? And how much is it worth? All right, I'll give you my tuna fish sandwich and my juice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the deal's sweeter now. All right, fine, I'll take it now. Right now, I'll give up my bubble gum for it. We've known how to do this since we were kids. That's value-based pricing. Is what am I giving up, and is it worth giving up? And what are they giving up, and is it worth them giving up? And like in any good transaction, whatever the methodology is, each party has to feel like they profit.
Okay.
And if each party feels like they profit, then you can do the transaction. If one of the parties does not feel like they profit, then there's no deal.
Mm-hmm.
So value-based pricing really is just about finding a scenario where we both feel like we've profited. So for example, if a client is like, well, I think that I'll make sorry, let me restart this example.
Mm-hmm.
Clients don't know how to value their own work. That's not their job.
Okay.
The job to value the work is the service provider's job. We know better than our clients what a website will do for them.
Mm-hmm.
They know what their business is. We don't know that part, but we know the website part. If we're web designers, they're not web designers, unless you're working for a web designer, of course. So if we're the web designer, then we should be able to say, as the expert, well, I know that on average, the websites that I design and build for my clients generally return 10% more revenue every year.
Okay.
Right. So if you're making $1 million, you do a website with me, I think you're going to be at 1.1 million at the end of the year.
Okay. And that's a very general estimation of it. Because let's say
because I'm not in their business.
Right. Because they could value maybe more leads, right? Like the website will generate leads, and then we'll have to go into the minutia of the details of, okay, well, how much does each lead, represent? What's the value of that and things like that. But essentially, you would just estimate like 10%.
Yeah, I mean, or I would estimate based on the data that I had.
Okay.
Right. So as an example, there was one client that I had talked to a few years ago. And I said, it was a nonprofit. And I asked them, well, why do you need a new website? And they said, well, we want to attract more donors and get more donations. I said, all right, well, what's your annual donation? What's the annual level of donations that you generally get?
Mm.
And they said, well, we don't see how that's any of your business. And I
Uh-huh.
said, well, then I can't price it for you and I can't do the work for you because I don't know what we're actually working for.
Okay.
And they said, we just need you to build a website. So essentially what they were saying is just tell us your costs.
And
Don't
that's
worry about what we're, and I was like, well, this is not a good fit.
okay, interesting. Because a lot of
Oh,
freelancers are in that boat. I think
right.
they just want you, they come to you, or the client comes to you to just deliver the deliverable, the website.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. To me, those are not the projects that I like to take. The reason for that, and again, this is not like a fancy philosophy or anything like that. I just have the experience of those being bad projects. So I just at some point decided not to take them anymore.
Mm.
And they end up being bad projects because, even if the client is willing to pay whatever your price was, you say, oh, $20,000. And they say, yeah, cool.
Mm.
I've been in situations where at the end of it, they go, well, this is it. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you mean this is it? This is a website. And they're like, well, but how is this supposed to increase my revenue? And I'm like, wait. When did we ever talk about it has to increase the revenue? And they're like, well, what did you think I wanted a website for? And I'm like, wait a sec. And
Mm.
so it's all those things that happen is like those requirements often come up at the end of a project. And so what I try to do in the sales process is force those conversations to happen early because
Okay.
they're always there. No one wants a website for a website. If it's a vanity project, even worse of a project, I just want a website to have a website. Well, dude, go to Squarespace.
Right.
There's a lot of really great templates there. That's generally where, but a website has a job to do. Like the work that we do as designers, usually the work that we're doing has a job to do.
Mm-hmm.
More conversion, more clients, more customers, less turnover, less churn, like more or less of something. They want some change through it. Like designers, that's our job is we make change. And so a client is usually coming to us to ask for some kind of change. They just don't know how to articulate it because it's not their job. We
Mm-hmm.
have to be good at that part. We have to
Mm-hmm.
be good at getting that stuff out of them, helping them understand the change that they want with their business, and then shepherding that and facilitating that through. And so when a client comes and says, I just want a website, don't worry about what it needs to do. I'm like, that's a lie. You might actually believe it. I don't think that you're lying to me, but we're going to find out that that's a lie. That's what I've learned in my experience with the clients that I've had.
Right.
So I don't let that slide through anymore. Those turn out to be bad projects for me.
Okay. Do you have any advice for people who, let's say, yeah, they do have a $5,000 budget, or maybe even 1,000. Actually, yeah, recently I turned down a job because $1,000 was all that my friend could afford, and I said, I love you, I appreciate you, but like unfortunately that's below my amount. And so I pitched it out to Twitter, and I was shocked at the amount of
I saw
people.
that.
Yeah, and so it's like everyone's got to, not to say that $1,000 is low in my in my estimation it's just below my price point, but it's like everyone fighting in the bottom of the barrel type of scenario. So any advice to designers out there who think maybe for them it is a lot and they just want to do it, but they're not having that value creation conversation?
Yeah. Is it okay if I push back on some of the stuff that you
Sure.
said?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So you said that, $1,000 is low,
Hmm.
right? Low is a relative term.
It's relative. Yes.
Low as compared to what? Right. So as an example, low for like, I would take $1,000 project.
Okay.
And you know what I would do for $1,000? Like, and let me ask you this
Hmm.
actually. If your friend or your client came to you and said, hey, I have $1,000 budget, will you make me a website? What would you say?
I would, again, that's just what's the word? I think it's just a criteria for me. Like it's below
Sure.
the meeting criteria, and so that's an automatic no. And I said, I appreciate it. I have other designers who would love to do it at that price point, and so I'll recommend it.
Totally.
And that's what I did.
Makes sense. Okay. Now,
Yeah.
if a client came to you and said, hey, Josh, I have $1,000, will you get on an hour-long phone call with me and just tell me some of the things that I could do to improve my website? I'll pay $1,000 for it. Would you do it?
Yes, because that's
Oh, but so now all of a sudden, $1,000 is no longer low. $1,000 is actually high.
right.
$1,000 for an hour, a phone call?
Well,
I'll do
yeah,
it. So
because
the $1,000 didn't change.
Mhm.
What it changed was what it was relative to.
Correct.
And so that's the thing that we as designers have to get better at. We can always change the scope. If the
Mhm.
budget is fixed, we can always change the scope around it. And that's a thing that we don't do. We just say, oh, if a client says, hey, I have $1,000 is my budget, we say, I don't do it. Well, you didn't even give them any solutions yet. What would you
Okay.
do for $1,000? Would you do a phone call? Would you write a report? Would you do a diagnostic?
Mm-hmm.
Would you put together a list of links for them?
Mm.
Like all of a sudden, $1,000 becomes a really good project there. But we try to equate it to like, well, this amount of thing or this thing costs this amount. It's like, that's not true. There's a website that I could build for $1,000. It would just have to be very constrained. It would be a one pager. I would do typography only, no imagery. I can get it done I can get it done by the end of this phone call. I'll
Right.
charge $1,000 for that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I think it comes down again to whoops, wrong thing here. Comes down to your cost, right? And like what's your minimum amount of cost that you're willing to do. And so if you know that it costs is under $1,000, then that's a yes in terms of the deliverable. But what I'm hearing, what I'm understanding is sometimes we see a price and we think that is a fixed thing and there's no room for negotiation. And I'm learning that it's like, okay, well, let's just get on a conversation first and discover and see what's possible. And I don't think a lot of people do that.
Right, I agree with that. Hopefully, what is clear in the example is that, like in that scenario, $1,000 was fixed. I didn't negotiate on the $1,000 part. I just negotiated on what I would do for the $1,000, and that may or may not be acceptable to the client. Right, so a client might be like, "No, I need a website for it. I don't want to do a phone call." And it's like, okay, well then we're not a good fit for each other. I think part of that has to do with costs, but this is part of the philosophy, the methodology of value pricing. One of the tenets of value pricing is you can always drive costs down. Once you understand the value, you can always drive costs down.
Okay.
So as an example, your minimum level of engagement, right, is $5,000 for kind of an audit or a discovery, and then so where does that come from? Like, what are the costs actually associated with that?
Yeah. See, that's a good question. It is, but maybe taken to your example, that's like an amount where it pays for a vacation or something like that. But it isn't anchored exactly to the cost.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what that actually means is that's actually a value-based price.
Okay.
Because basically what you're doing is you're saying, it's just not worth it for me to do it for under that amount.
Right.
I don't want to do it for under that amount.
Right.
I would rather play video games. I would rather not do the project. I would rather go out to eat. I'd rather just sit in my house and do nothing than do this project for $5, which is fine, which is totally fine. That's what value-based is. It's just not valuable enough to me to do it that way. Right. And so that's why to me, it's like, it's not really about cost. In some scenarios, it is. With agencies, with big teams, part of it is like, well, I got to pay employees or I got to pay my team.
Right.
And I don't want to eat it because the client is paying me less than I have to pay my team. But again, you can drive costs down. Well, can you have one less team member?
Okay.
Can you have two less team members? Could you do it on your own? Could you outsource it? Could you, like, what are all the creative ways that you can drive your costs down? That is a design exercise. And I think as designers, we don't exercise that muscle a lot. Right? We don't say, how can I be creative about driving my costs down? We just generally say, well, this is what it costs. Okay, well then there are some clients that you're just not going to work with because you're not creative enough to do it.
Okay. So here's an objection that I could probably anticipate a client would say, because they say, okay, $5,000, and then they would want me to justify that price. And then I would then start to go into the cost, and that's kind of a trap a little bit. It's like, well, it actually cost me $500 to do it, with my subscription cost to Webflow and just my own time, things like that. So then they'll find out, well, you're like overcharging me. I feel like you're taking advantage of me. How do you respond to that?
I'll give you 3 different answers for it.
All right.
These are all different answers that I've given in my career. Hopefully I'll remember all 3 of them as I go through. Okay. So one answer is, if it is a value-based price, then you tell them that it's a value-based price. It's just not worth it for me to do it for anything less. That's hard to combat.
So cocky.
Right. Yeah. So right. The point that I want to bring up about this is, whenever I teach pricing, I always teach positioning first.
Okay.
Because that's the way that you justify this. It's worth it if you are the best designer that they've ever seen. Right? Because then they're like, I mean, man, that dude's arrogant, but I still want to work with him. I kind of want to work with him more now. Right? So, like, if you are the top expert, their preferred partner, and you'll be like, well, so like here's a more realistic example. I mean, I would normally do it for that price, but I have like 10 other clients that are paying double that right now, and so I'm just gonna choose them first.
Right.
And so what could the client? That's a transparent answer. Not a lot of people are comfortable giving that answer, but it's true and it's honest. What that client might do with that information, they would say, well, what if we paid double? Oh, well, then you move up in the line. That's what happens. You move up in the queue now because of that. And so the one answer that you can give is you can really expose the value transaction. You can say it's just not worth it for me to do that project. Now, if you're lying about that, you better be willing to call that bluff. But for designers who have a line out the door of people who are willing to work with them and waiting to work with them, it's true. There are designers out there like that where they're just like, I mean, my minimum level of engagement is $40,000 because all of my clients are paying me $50,000. So as much as I want to work with the client that's paying 20,000, I value money, and I'm going to take clients who do that because I already have a list of clients who are ready to do that with me. Now, if no client is ready to do that with them, well, then that minimum level of engagement goes down, doesn't it? Right. You know, it goes down to 20,000 or 10,000. So the supply and demand really does come into play here. That's why I teach positioning first. Is if you're well positioned, then you can say to a client, it's not worth it for me to take on this job for whatever the factors are. So that's reason. Okay. That's explanation number one.
Okay.
So
many follow-up questions on that, but let's keep going.
Oh, do you want to stop there or you want to keep going?
Okay. Well, positioning.
Yeah.
Any tips on a new freelancer who may not be able to flex a lot of, their high positions or credentials? How would one do that and demand or command a higher price?
You have to create it. You have to create the leverage for yourself. So how do you create leverage for yourself? One way to get to be well positioned is to be the best or the most experienced in a certain area.
Okay.
Right. I'm the best Webflow developer. I've built 1,000 Webflow sites. I've worked with 1,000 design system clients, right? So just contact hours with lots and lots of clients. That moves you to being well positioned in a particular niche. How do you do that? Well, the first one, no one's going to hire you to work on a Webflow site if you've never worked on a Webflow site. So what do? And this is a very controversial. There's another thing that a lot of people don't like. What do? You work for free on the first one, or not necessarily for free, but you work for a testimonial. You say the deal is I'll work on this site for you, my brother, my uncle, my neighbor, my friend. I'll do this site for you for free, but I want a testimonial at the end of it. I want you to refer me to somebody that you know, right? That's how you build some leverage. Is you do the first one for free or the second one for free and maybe the third one for free. All of a sudden you've got 3 Webflow sites under your belt. Well, now you're a Webflow professional. Now you're a Webflow expert. You're now, or at least Webflow experienced. Now you have 3 more than somebody else does out there. So that's how you start to build that position. And even more, if you get more niche, I am the best at Webflow sites for dentists. All right. Who else is the best Webflow site for dentists? Webflow person for dentists out there. I don't know who they are.
Right.
And if you have a portfolio of 3 dentists that you've done websites for, and another dentist comes along, is like, wow, I like these dentist websites. I want this dentist website too. Then you become the preferred partner. But those first 3, you might have to do for cheap. You might have to do for testimonials. You might have to do for free. But you can build that leverage for yourself.
So putting in the sweat equity up front, and then that's just what you got to do to build a reputation.
That's what investment is, right? Short-term loss to get long-term gain.
Correct.
It's an investment in your own career.
Right. Yes. Investment mindset. Okay, cool. Moving on to the other 2 points.
All right, the other 2. All right. I already forgot what the third one is. The second one here is you can actually expose your formula if it truly is a value-based formula. So as an example of that, the formula could be if you're working for a client that has e-commerce is usually the easiest, right? So I'll use that as an example. Yeah, your client is an e-commerce shop or an e-commerce company. They want a new website. From your work because you're well positioned, and well positioned means you have experience usually, right? So you are experienced at building, rebuilding, redesigning e-commerce sites. You know that on average your work increases revenue by 50%, let's say, right? So the client has $1 million business. They work with you. They now have a $1.5 million business. The value created is $500,000. Right? They go from $1 million to $1.5 million. That's $500,000 that you've created from your work. So what you do is you say, I take 10% of that. So 10% of $500,000 is $50,000. So your price is $50,000.
Right.
So you expose that formula to the client and you say, you can edit the formula if you want. My price starts at $50,000 or sorry, 10% of the bounty that I will earn for you. I can't guarantee it. I'm not guaranteeing it, but this is what I've seen with my previous clients. Poke at the formula if you want. And you know what often happens in that? The client usually says, like, oh, I don't run a $1 million business. I run a $2 million business. And actually, I think this is going to give us, this is going to give me a 60% increase because the last time I did something like this, it actually worked out to be that. And you go, okay, cool. Thank you for the increase in rate. Or you can say, yeah, that's cool. Well, yeah, like I'll actually then do it for 7%. And what
Right.
did you just do? You just negotiated down against yourself? Who
Right.
does that? And sometimes that is a way to build trust with the client that you're actually like, oh, that's cool. Like I would actually want you to have more then because I'm content with that $50,000 website. Because
Right.
I know in my head, what are my costs? $4,500. I make
Right.
$50,000. My costs are only $4,500. What's my margin on that? I don't know how to do the math, but like
Right.
4,000%,
Yeah.
whatever it is. Like that's so you can expose the formula if it truly is a value-based formula.
Okay, I got to push back a little rebuttal there.
Right.
Let's say I'm a very stingy client, and then you
Yep.
expose your formula to me, and I say, "Oh, actually, now I don't make 500,000 a year. It's actually probably lower." And obviously, with the percentage, I'm lowering the percentage so I can get a
Yep.
cheaper, quote from you. So it's
Totally.
actually 200,000. So that's 20,000 instead of 50. How do you respond to that? Do you just like, okay, I see what you're doing, and then do you just kind of like shoot them off?
So two things around that. One is to me that's not a stingy client. That's a liar of a client.
Okay.
I don't work with liars.
Mm-hmm.
When you work with liars, all bets are off because you don't know what is fixed or what is the truth.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to assume that my client is a liar or read into the fact that my client's a liar, that's a deal breaker for me because it's like I don't know what we're working on. Then something's going to change. Something is going to come out to be false. I can't work against that.
Right.
So if my client is a liar, if I believe that they're lying, if they see that formula and it goes down, I'm like, I see what you're doing. Then we're done.
Right.
I'm not the service provider for you. Right. So that's one thing. If they're actually telling the truth and they're like, oh, actually, you asked me about this. I thought you meant this, but it's actually, okay, fine, I get that.
Yeah.
So now at 10%, it turned out to be $20,000. What do I do then? Well, now I negotiate scope. The price came down, so the scope will come down.
Okay.
So what will I do? Well, actually, let's just skip discovery. What I can do is a couple of diagnostic tweaks. Let me actually jump into your Shopify store and just make some tweaks there. Let's launch an experiment. Let's do that. Let's do a 1-week experiment instead. And I'll do that for $20,000 instead of a 4-month website redesign.
Okay.
Right. The scope changes now to make it so that price is something that is worth doing. The price makes it so that the work is worth doing for me.
Okay.
Right. That $20,000 for a year-long website redesign, it's not worth it for me. I make no money. So I wouldn't do that, but I could negotiate the scope down and they may not agree to that part. Right. And so that's what the negotiation part of it is. I think a lot of designers are afraid of the negotiation part.
Yeah. And what I'm learning now is, wow, there's so much freedom in actually just being curious and opening the conversation to negotiation and that things aren't fixed. It's pretty game changing. It's pretty amazing.
I learned this from Blair Enns. I know you've read some Blair stuff. Like Blair's awesome.
Right.
This thing that the thing that he said once that I really latched onto is when you share a formula with a client, you invite them to scrutinize the formula. So that and he was actually sharing that to say like, be careful when you share formulas with clients because then they're going to scrutinize. But it works both ways. If the formula is solid, let them poke at it, right? Because then they're like, wow, this is science. All right, cool. Because it becomes solid in that way. And I think there's a lot of creativity in coming up with a transparent formula. You brought up my salary post earlier. It has come in very handy for me in posting my salary because when companies come to me and say, hey, we'd like to hire you and we'd like to pay you $200,000 a year, I'm like, well, but I'm making more than that now. You could see it right here.
Right.
Like,
right.
You can see so why would that be worth it for me to do? Right. And it's I don't say that in an offensive way anymore. It's just science. It's just math.
It's your track record. Yeah.
It's my track record. It's here. It's exposed. It's out there.
Right.
And it's honest. So if you want to poke at the formula, poke at the formula.
Right.
Oh, but we'll give you equity. Okay. What do you think the equity is going to turn out to be? Do you think it'll be more than what my revenue was last year? If not, then why would I do it? Right. And so I think the transparency really helps out in a lot of scenarios.
It's really revealing to me. Again, I mean, we talked about self-worth, but I do think self-confidence as a designer, and knowing maybe not what you're worth, but what your design or your skills are worth, and having that backbone to actually stand up to say, hey, look, I actually am looking for this amount, and not, pretending to be, or trying not to be offensive and things like that. I think that that is a huge mindset shift that, including me, most designers need to go through.
I
Yeah.
think there's this I'm lucky that I've been able to reach a level with my agency that I ran, because we were so narrowly positioned, and also at the very top of that positioning too. When you get to that stage, the negotiations look very different, and I think that's something that designers don't anticipate until they are in that situation. They don't know that, they don't. And so what I mean by that is, I just wrote a proposal yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
and I was on a sales call with a prospective client. And he said to me, like, when we got to the negotiation phase, and I said, tell me about your time constraints and tell me about your budget constraints. Like, is there anything I need to know
Okay.
about, what your organization will spend, or what you're not allowed to spend, or when you have to spend it by, like all of that kind of stuff. And he said to me the thing that almost every client says to me now. They say, oh, I mean, in terms of budget, like, you know how much we should be doing this for. You tell me, and then I'll
Mm,
go and work for it.
okay.
Cool. Like that, I didn't have that when I was a freelance junior designer, right?
Right.
Clients would say, I have a $10,000 budget or $1,000 budget, or whatever. They would tell you what their budget was. When you get to be positioned well enough, you know what the prices are. You
Mm,
know what they should be spending, because, and this is the key to it, because you know where they will make profit. You
okay.
know that if you charge them $100,000 and you're only going to make them 50, it's a
Mm,
waste of their money. You know intentionally that you wasted their money. I think that's an unethical place to be. I don't like being in
mm,
that position. If I think that my price will be above what the client's going to make, it's a bad deal for them. Why would I coerce them into that?
mm-hmm.
So my price will always be lower than what they'll make out of it. Otherwise, it's not going to be a good transaction for them.
Right.
And me knowing enough about the industry and about the results and the work that I do, I always know that if they spend 50 with me, they'll make 100. If they spend 100 with me, they'll make 200. If they spend
Mm,
500 with me, they'll make 1 million. Like, that's always part of my not a guarantee, but that's my promise to my clients is, whatever you spend on me, I will make sure that you make more than that. You will
mm-hmm.
at least break even.
Yeah.
If I think we're even close to break even, that's too risky of a deal for me.
Right. Right. And it forces you to really know and learn your craft to
Yes.
understand what you can deliver. Yeah. That's a
Totally.
good win-win strategy. Amazing. Very good. I know we're at the end of the hour. Could you are you open to
Yeah, keep
share a little
going.
bit more?
Yeah.
Now, this is all service, right? Offering created
Yeah.
services. I'd love for you to dive into products, because I know this is kind of a little bit the transition that you've done, or maybe even selling a books or courses or things like that. How has your pricing strategy, or what you've learned from value-based pricing, and transfer over to that? Because in terms of product, it's a fixed price, so it's completely different. Maybe you can share a little bit on that.
You're gonna like visibly observe my confidence changing like immediately, because like I'm very confident when it comes to pricing services, because I've been doing it for the last 25 years.
Hmm.
I have like a year's worth of experience in pricing products. So it's like, oh, I don't know. So you're gonna hear a lot more hesitation
Okay.
from me, and and some of that stuff. You're totally right that it is very different. Like the way that just the income distribution, or the money distribution, is different when you're making product. Like when you're doing services, you propose a service, but before you start, generally you get a deposit, right? And like clients will pay you, and then essentially what you're doing is you're sort of like earning the money back,
Hmm.
right? Like earning the money as you go, as you work. Whereas with products, it's different, where like you're investing a lot of your effort up front, so you're
Hmm.
technically in the negative. When you release a product, you've spent 6 weeks on it, right? Not getting paid, right? So you're in some sort of deficit, and then every new customer that buys it, you climb out of the deficit, and then you go up and up and up and up and up from there.
So like a
So
J curve model.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes, that's a really good way to put. I didn't think about it that way. That's a good way to put it. So in terms of like how the effort distribution is, it's just different on the provider end or on the creator end. Then in terms of the marketing and the sales of that product, especially because it's not services, it is a fixed price that
Hmm.
people can click a button, add to cart, check out, all that kind of stuff. Generally with products, um, the relativeness is different, right? So like, for example, when I release a course, what I have to keep in mind is, are people who are my customers, are they buying other courses? And if my course is $500 and somebody else's course is $100, mine has to be at least 5 times as good as that other one. Right.
Mm.
So the relativeness changes. It's still relative. It's still a relative price, but what
Mhm.
it's relative to changes. And
Okay.
so, those are the things that I'm learning is like, what's the difference between selling a $500 product and a $100 product? A lot I'm learning, a
Okay.
lot is because one of them is perceived as a premium product and the other one is perceived as a commoditized product.
Mm.
So the effort that I put into one versus the effort I put into another, that might be very different
Right.
because of what I'm expecting. I'm expecting to sell less of my $3,000 course than I am of my $100 course, but I'm expecting to make it up in volume,
Mhm.
and that changes the projections. The thing that I find that is the same though is at what I'm learning is, with when you run an agency, it's a portfolio model where like if you have 10 clients, one client may pay you $1 million, another client may pay you 100,000, another client might pay you 1,000, right? So you have clients that are like, in this bracket and in that bracket and this other bracket. The same thing is true with products that a creator might make. You
Mhm.
might have products that are designed to be low ticket, low volume and low ticket. Sorry, low volume, high ticket.
Mhm.
Or the other side is high volume, low ticket. So there's all sorts of different slices of that.
Right.
But again, it's still a portfolio. And
Mhm.
so you get to decide, well, how much do I want to invest in our lower ticket items? How much time, how much marketing, how much ads, how much sales, and then how much do I want to invest in the higher stuff? So
Right.
in that way, I think it's the same. And then in other ways, I think it's very different.
Okay. It seems to me the natural progression of, creatives selling, they go from selling their time to then, yeah, like decoupling that and then selling it for value. And then they naturally go into products, which maybe that may be even more detached to their time, right? Because it's especially for digital products, they can scale it more. Do you think that's the case? Is like people wanting when they go into products, they're kind of buying their time back and detaching the amount of time that they're putting into selling? Because yeah, I'm just curious on your take on that.
Yes, certainly for me. I
Yeah.
don't know if I can speak for others. I'm not sure what the trends are.
Hmm.
I think that's true. One thing that I realize is that like even though I have figured out how to make a lot of money with the time that I have, it still feels like there's a cap on that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And at some point, like everyone just runs out of time. And so if there's a cap on that, that's the cap, then, right? If there's a cap on your time and you're only able to make a certain amount of money on your time, it doesn't scale, or at least it scales linearly.
Hmm.
So, when I went from a one-person agency and I hired my first contractor, we were making double, right? Because there's two of us now. And then with three people, it's triple. There is a little bit of a law of diminishing returns. So
Hmm.
it's not like if you hire 50 employees, you get 50 times the revenue. You hire 50 employees, you get like 20 times the revenue.
Right.
So like it just scales linearly and has diminishing returns to it.
Hmm.
But product creation actually can scale exponentially,
Hmm.
in that way. And then also as you hire people to create things with you, or you outsource some of your stuff, or you license, or you affiliate, or all of those kinds of models are open to you. I think
Hmm.
the scale is a little bit different. It reminds me, Nathan Barry, who runs Kit, he wrote a really great post a couple years ago about the ladders of wealth creation.
Mm.
And actually, we have a Figma file. I'm going to drop his diagram in the Figma file
Okay.
here. Um,
I'll see if I can search it up on the internet too.
let's see. Uh, there it is here. Um, and
Okay.
he basically says like, there, and this tracks to what you had just said too, which is like, at some point you sell your time for money, and that's like services, or
Mm.
you're an employee or something. Then you create your own service business, and then productize services, and then and this maps to my trajectory, and I know it maps to a bunch of other people's trajectory as well.
Very
So
cool.
these are the ladders of wealth creation, as he puts it, that I think tracks pretty well.
Right. Very cool. It's great. Okay. I do want to share this bit sales cycle here. I don't know if this is accurate, but like, is there a difference to selling creative services and when most clients, I guess in your case, design system clients, when they buy most creative services compared to selling products? Are there like highs and lows in that?
Yes, but they're stuff that it's dependent on.
Okay.
So what I mean by that is, I ran an agency that specialized in design systems. Design systems are generally bought by large enterprises. That's where it's worth to spend a lot of money on something like that. And so the buying cycle was tied to the buying cycles and the shipping schedules and cycles of big enterprises. So what that
Hmm.
generally means is, in the summer where people are usually taking off on vacation, no one usually buys. So at Super Friendly, that was the thing that we found was like between June, July, August, September.
Mm.
It's a down sale cycle. We would never close anything, around those times of year.
Okay.
But I could almost just about set my watch to like September 25th, like kids are back in school, people are, back at work. They did their H2 planning and they're like executing on their second half of the year plans. Like September, it really ramps up.
Okay.
October, it's up. And then there's like kind of an end of the year push, like, oh, we have this remaining budget. We need to use it or lose it, like in November.
Uh,
And then, as you might expect, right, people start going out for, at least in the US, Thanksgiving around the end of November, Christmas and holidays at the end of the year holidays, in December. So like we would never close anything in December. And we actually, I think the last couple of years that we were in business, we had just had a policy of like, we won't start any new project in
mm,
past December 10.
right.
There were a lot of clients who were like, "Oh, we got to use our end of the year budget," but then they're just not around. They
Hmm.
hire us, and then we start a project, and they're not around, and it moves to January anyway. And
Right.
then we kind of have to restart the project anyway in January because everybody's forgotten about it and just getting back to work. So
Right.
January is down, and then February starts to pick up again.
Yeah.
So February, March, April, everybody's kind of marching towards summer.
Right.
And so like yeah,
Okay.
exactly. What you're
Something
drawing
like this.
is exactly it. It looks like
Okay.
that,
Cool. Cool. Cool.
right? So
Nice. Good to
the
know.
the product that I make is also for the same audience. So the sales
Okay.
cycles match up pretty well.
Okay.
Because the products that I make right now with Design System University, they are like Design System in 90 days is an enterprise product. It's not a product. It's $4,000 a ticket. That's
Hmm.
not something that an individual usually is going to spend their own money on. It's usually
Right.
going to be subsidized by a company. It's designed that way for a company to for people to use education budgets and things like that to basically
Mm.
be part of that cohort. So the buying cycles are the same. That's why, and it's funny that you drew it this way. That's why we run it twice a year. It's a 3-month cohort. It runs from February to May and then September to December. Right. So like it matches the buying cycle exactly. That's why we run it that way. Is it matches the buying cycle. The downtimes are the times that we do marketing,
Interesting.
right? So that people will be working on the thing and actually in the cohort when they're actually working on it at work. Now, the opposite part of that are our lower tier courses,
Hmm.
which are designed for individuals.
Hmm.
Those are the things that in the downtime, when people have downtime from work, what I'm learning is that's when they're investing in their own careers and career growth. So it's like, oh yeah, in the
Okay.
summer I'll do a course so that I'll be ready for the fall. I'll have this new knowledge. During holiday break at the end of the year, yeah, I have some time to do a little bit of self-learning or self-improvement or like, teach, learning something on my own. And
Mm.
so that's when we see sales spike for those kinds of products. So I
Okay.
think learning the buying cycles of your own, and that's very specific to the products that I offer.
Right.
So I think
Right.
learning the buying cycles of your own customers is really important to how you do sales and marketing.
Yeah, no, I think this is really helpful because as a freelancer, everyone's taking like in the summertime, everyone's taking vacation, and so you can almost plan that this area is going to be dead, and
That's
so
right.
then you can probably work on self develop, work on yourself, or cleaning up systems and operations, and then these are the times where you really know that clients are looking for your services. So that's interesting.
Totally. Yep.
Yeah, because that's the thing. When people get into freelance, it's feast or famine, and it's quite clear in the diagram here. They need to know when those feast times are coming, when the famine's coming,
Yeah.
and plan it
Totally.
accordingly. Great. Okay, that's awesome. Well, that's all I got prepared. I mean,
Oh,
you've
that's
you've
it. Just that.
shared. Thank you so much. I learned so much here, and really appreciate your time. I hope those watching get a lot as well. For those who want to know more about what you do, how can they reach out to you?
Um, danmall.com is my website. Sign up for my newsletter. That's probably the best way to hear the stuff that I'm doing. I'm on the different social platforms, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that stuff, but who knows about the future of all those. So we'll see. But I'm on all those places too. And yeah, you can send me a message on any one of those places and I'll get back to you as I do.
Cool. And if this video goes viral, do you think this would be a good indicator for you to actually possibly create another book or some type of product around, helping designers get rich? Because I think this is so valuable.
Yes, I mean that's something that's in my mind a lot. I have a pricing book. It's 8 years old. I have a ton of other things that I would want to like add to it, edit it, like recant even, and say like, oh, I have a totally new approach on some of this stuff. So yeah, I think the more people that I know it will be valuable to, it's definitely more incentive for me to want to spend more time in that area.
Got it. Okay. Dan, thank you so much. Appreciate you. And hope to have you back again in the future.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Josh.
Awesome.